But I would consider deism a subset of theism.
Yeah, I actually would pretty much agree.
So you would have to establish theism in order to justify deism and not the other way around.
Well, yeah, in a sense, yes. But what I mean really is that I don't think you have to prove that a God is interventionist in the sense that theism...
I understand. Sure. I understand.
Okay. Sure. Anyways, so firstly, I would say that I would give a sort of cosmological argument in line with modern physics understanding of the creation, or the not the creation, but the post-Big Bang state of the universe. Something like as follows. Just a three-premise argument. Things which begin to exist.
Sure, you're talking about the Kalam cosmological argument.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which we've actually done a whole show on, and sure. At the wiki that I talked about before, wiki.ironchariots.org, there's a write-up on Kalam as well.
Sure, well, you can, well, in a nutshell, what's your
in a nutshell, this idea, it's been reworked where things that begin to exist, everything that begins to exist must have a cause. And that's a bit of a cheat because they're later going to define a God as something that didn't begin to exist, which is an attempt to define something into existence. So it's been reworked in order to avoid some of the problems. But the thing is, the premises can't actually be verified, which is, now we're back to the issue that we have about whether or not something whether or not empiricism would trump reason, because and there's a little bit of equivocation between in the argument about universe and also about exist, because we simply don't have a good enough understanding of any point prior to the Big Bang using Big Bang cosmology, including whether or not it is sensible to talk about before the Big Bang.
Yeah, well, from what I understand of the Big Bang, I don't actually think that it is sensible to talk of before in a temporal sense.
Sure, and if you accept that it doesn't make sense to talk about before in a temporal sense, then you can't say that this is something that began to exist because that's a temporal event.
However, I would say that I think we can understand beginning to exist in first of all, I would say that causality and temporality are only incidentally linked for some.
How can they only be incidentally linked when causality is necessarily temporal? A has to come before B in order for it to be a cause, and
not
the entire.
Necessarily. Actually, there was a rather interesting experiment that was done, I think, in the last couple of decades. Quantum eraser experiments, delayed choice. It actually gives the rather bizarre conclusion that events in the future can actually cause, via quantum superposition,
yeah, sure,
in the past.
And I don't remotely accept it, for one, because I don't pretend to understand it or have enough information. But also, this is something that I don't accept has been demonstrated sufficiently to make the claim.
Well, I mean, of course, I mean, that's certainly you're free to do that, but I would say that the idea that there's really actually no a cause, to me, I would define as, you know, in a really brief sense, that without which the effect would not be.
And my general definition is that which is both necessary and sufficient.
Yeah,
and proximal. You know,
of course, it seems intuitively kind of contradictory that something in the future could cause something in the past.
Sure.
I mean, I guess that's the issue with quantum physics in general. It's just quite counterintuitive. But I think that a theist could quite reasonably and completely, because I understand that this is a very seriously undertaken experiment. There's quite a few papers I've read on it, actually, peer-reviewed. So I think that a theist could reasonably say that even if we live in a universe which is closed, and therefore, and then before the universe, there was, before in the sense that it was also the beginning of time,
sure.
Per se, I think that a theist could quite reasonably say that causal priority does not necessarily correspond to temporal priority, and I think that they would be, I don't necessarily say that it would be a convincing argument in itself, but I would say that it's certainly not something which can be simply discarded, because there does exist empirical scientific evidence to rationalize that point of view. I'm not saying that necessarily the acceptance of that experiment implies theism, but I'm saying that a theist...
Well, I'm actually curious about what actually implies theism, because you know, you can make whatever kind of appeals to quantum mechanics that you like to attempt to make something seem more rational, and I realize that I'm making an appeal to, you know, a request for some sort of empirical evidence. But even within the realm of pure reason, I don't see how one can justify claiming that the cause of the universe is best described or best applied to a God.
Yeah, okay,
I mean,
well...
how do you distinguish the God, which would justify the claim of theism? And it doesn't matter to me whether it's, you know, what the specifics of the God are, but how, you know, there is some baggage in the label God, and if you can't distinguish between a God creating universe and magical universe creating pixies, then you've made absolutely no headway.
Well, the way that I would go about that is I would say that when people look at cosmological arguments and they read them and they get to the conclusion and they're like, well, okay, so this argument claims to be implying God, and then they're like, well, it seems that God has been kind of these properties of God have been kind of defined into existence. And I would say that I would say actually that the Kalam itself doesn't prove the existence of God. I think that the Kalam merely proves that the universe has a cause, and I actually think that
I would completely agree that if Kalam were both valid and sound, at most it would demonstrate a cause.
Agreed.
It would not necessarily be a cause that would be in agreement with theism.
Agreed.
So when I asked for a rational defense of theism, why would you go to an argument that doesn't necessarily lead to theism?
That's the thing. I think that there's a few steps to defining theism, because I've argued in the past with people who would actually hold that the universe is not caused, and they would argue this on the basis that, you know, it's the start of time and causality doesn't apply without temporality, and that's another argument in itself, I guess. But I would say that once you accept the notion that the universe has a cause, I think that what we end up dealing with is quite speculative, and in a sense it really comes down to what can we know simply by logic, since we really don't have much empirical knowledge beyond our universe, and I'm not even entirely sure we ever can.
I can kind of shortcut this, and I'm reluctant to do so because I don't want you to think I'm being unnecessarily dismissive, but we're really short on time.
Sure.
And what I would say is that the gap that you're trying to bridge from a cause, which, by the way, I'm not remotely convinced that Kalam is both valid and sound, but getting from that cause to the theism thing is always an argument from ignorance. It is, we can't think of any better explanation than this hypothetical God thing that a lot of people seem to believe in, and therefore that's what I'm going to go with. Unless you can come up with an argument that doesn't make an appeal, that doesn't suffer from that argument from ignorance fallacy, I think we're back at square one, where you haven't made any sort of rational defense of theism.
Well, I mean, I kind of see what you're saying, but at the same time, I think that even if we even if the universe is merely a nested universe within a multiverse, I think that really only sets back the problem one step, because really what we're asking is, we need a cause of the universe. Let's say that our universe, for the sake of argument, is you know, not a nested universe, because it's really the same idea. But
sure, it's the one and only. Ignore the multiverse. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's say that our universe is, you know, comprised of space and time, obviously, and that, you know, we're not going to say it's uncaused for the sake of this. And then we say that, okay, so whatever caused it, we're really left with two alternatives. So it can either be self-caused, or it can be caused by something which is not within its own set. And I would say that, in general, the universe has been understood by physics to not only be within space-time, but actually to be the fabric of space-time itself. Which is to say, as the universe expands, we're actually, more and more space-time is being created, not simply we're expanding into more space-time kind of thing. So I would say that whatever created or whatever cause we have to create the universe must either exist in another category of space-time.
Sure, that's a tautology. I mean, we didn't. I don't mean. I really am. We got to kind of rush this a bit. But to say that there's a cause that is external to space-time after that long discussion of what it is a tautology. You can't say anything about it, including whether or not it's intelligent, whether or not it continues to exist, whether or not it would qualify as an agent or a being. There's no reason to think that if there is some kind of God thing that would fit this criteria, that there might also be some sort of physical thing that meets this criteria that exists outside of it.
I mean, I don't even think it's logically, like, sound. I think it's like a contradiction of terms to say that something non-physical could exist outside of space-time.
Wait, you might want to rephrase that.
It'd be like...
You might want to rephrase that, because you just said it's logical contradiction to say that something non-physical exists outside.
Sorry, something physical can exist
Sure.
outside of space-time.
But I don't see that is necessarily...
Well, I mean, if we define a physical thing as something which has spatial dimensions, and
sure,
without space-time, you have none.
But you have no way of assessing before the Big Bang. It's one of the reasons. I mean, you want to dismiss, the multiverse theory and nested theories and things.
I'm not dismissing. I understand. Multiverse is probable, but I don't think it really
for the sake of this discussion, you wanted to do it. And what I'm saying is that it's the reason that we came to those hypotheticals about multiverses is to discuss these sorts of things. And the multiverse would necessarily be of a physical nature, even though it's external to the universe as we know and understand it. And so we've got at least two propositions, and we can't distinguish between them. And it goes right back to what Tracy was saying at the beginning of the show, and that is you have a potentially naturalistic explanation that is known to exist, or a supernatural explanation that's not known to exist, and something that is natural or supernatural that is known not to exist. And these three are not equally viable as explanations for a phenomenon. That which is known, understood, and demonstrably true is automatically more viable as an explanation than those which are either unknown or not demonstrably true or demonstrably false. And so what you seem to be doing is saying, we need some explanation for the universe, and it should have these particular characteristics. And hey, what do you know? Those are some of the same characteristics that people have proposed about gods. Therefore, that makes this plausible. And that's not true.
Well, I mean, obviously, I would argue it is, but...
Well, did you hear Tracy's example earlier about the dragon?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I wasn't catch the end of the show. I was actually trying to call in the whole time.
I'll do it really briefly. Sure. Somebody's got a huge hole in their backyard, big enough for a swimming pool, and a tree knocked down in front of their house, and we can find no other explanation, and they claim a dragon did it. The effect is consistent with the explanation for dragons, or the description of dragons that people have given. But the fact that these things occurred and don't have an explanation doesn't mean that a dragon is any more probable.
Well, I think I understand the argument, but I really think it's a false analogy because, I mean...
And I know you do, but we are completely out of time,
yeah,
so
well,
call back another week.
So.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
And I apologize to the other people who didn't get through, but literally there's like 12 seconds left. We're going to El Arroyo after the show. I won't be here next week. Russell will be on, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye. Unrendered. We're unrendered.
Clearly.
Man, that show goes too fast.